Assalamu alaikum. You're listening to the New Beginnings podcast. No fluff, no holding back, just honest conversations about your journey as a new Muslim.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam, from the Shahada and beyond.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the New Beginnings podcast. I'm your co-host Bilal Brown.
And I'm Amanda. Thank you all for joining us again. So this episode is titled, So What Kind of a Muslim Are You? And for the next hour or so, we're going to take a look at all the various labels, or some of the various labels that are often used to describe Muslims.
It comes as a shock to many new converts just how diverse the Muslim community actually is, especially if you live in an area of a small or homogenous Muslim community. So it can be very confusing to learn that there are many labels and groups out there and to figure out where we actually fit in as converts to Islam.
Since New Beginnings was set up, the founders have always worked hard to be inclusive and to provide a non-sectarian, non-denominational space for all converts to Islam. And for that reason, we've always avoided using any labels in classes, at events, and even in this podcast. However, we've also recognized that this ideal simply doesn't reflect what we experience in the wider Muslim and non-Muslim communities. And so we decided to try and tackle this topic in an open and unbiased way as much as we can.
So our aim today is not to cause further division, but to give our listeners a better understanding of what these terms really mean, in order to be able to cut through what is often very divisive and misleading rhetoric and to foster better unity amongst our diverse communities. So today we are joined by our brother and convert of many years, Ilyas Foy. So brother Ilyas, can you just introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a bit about your journey to and in Islam?
My full name is Muhammad Ilyas Foy, and that's my legal name because I embraced Islam in 1982. And in those days, it was extremely difficult to enter a Muslim community with an English name. I know in London, some of the brothers that were working with Yusuf Islam kept their English names, but in the northwest of England, with its Muslim community being mainly people from the villages of India and Pakistan, it would have been difficult to keep my original name of Ian George Foy. So I embraced Islam in 1982 after a long search looking at different religions, belief systems. I was originally a fairly devout Methodist up until the age of 14. And then the church elders changed the rule on temperance. And they put it in the newsletter, we changed the rule on temperance. And that sort of rocked my world a little bit because temperance was fundamental to the teachings of John Wesley. And for those who don't understand what temperance is, basically it's making alcohol forbidden, which John Wesley found to be an evil amongst the communities that he was originally preaching to. And temperance was so important to the Methodist Church that the temperance movement in America that basically set up prohibition in the 1930s came from the Methodist women who were wives of leaders in government. So temperance was important. And to just wave it to one side taught me something rather important. It taught me the fact that you can follow religion and you can follow tenets of that religion. But if other people decide to change the rules, they will change the rules, whether you like it or not, whether you see it as a law of God or you see it as a doctrine that's important, and they'll change the rules, which is what we see in ordinary secular life, where people change the rules to fit with other people's wishes and desires. So that rocked my world, really. So I sort of walked away from Methodism. I was never heavy into the Trinity. And the concept of God being three separate beings. So it was easy to walk away and to come out of it being a God-fearing person without any particular label. Because in Christianity, of course, there are many labels, many denominations. And I was fine with that until I was about 17. And I needed to find something that was spiritual. And in those days, there was nothing that was palatable to 17-year-olds. You could go to an ashram if you wanted in India. You could become a Buddhist. You could have a guru like the Beatles did and like the Rolling Stones did. You could explore Buddhism. You could go to a kibbutz, none of which made any sense to me. So I went to a Bible class for the summer in the Wirral and studied the Bible, inwards, outwards, back to front, etc. And I came out of it believing nothing apart from the fact that there was a God, there was a creator who created all of this. But having no hook to hang my religious coat on, so to speak. So then became a long journey. And the long journey involved 2 failed marriages, a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, a lot of escapism to try and find where my spirit belonged. I looked at Hinduism, I looked at Buddhism, I even read the teachings of Aleister Crowley, trying to find something that put my soul to peace, so to speak. And it was only when I joined the Anti-Nazi League and I bumped into a lot of Hindus, and I kept asking the question, it's an anti-racist organization. Why are there no Muslims? And they would tell me there are no Muslims because the Muslims, they didn't drink. And we used to have all our meetings in pubs. So I never really met any Muslims to talk to in depth. And then Youth of Islam became Muslim in 1977. And that sort of changed the whole idea. It made Islam at least acceptable, palatable, maybe not fashionable, but it made it palatable. So I started looking into Islam, and I had lots of questions. I had questions that contradicted the Bible. I had questions that contradicted my own self, what I now know as nafs, my own self, my own base desires. And one of the key questions I had was about fasting. Why would anybody want to fast for 30 days in Ramadan? And I knew a few Muslims by then. So I asked these friends of mine, and they came up with all sorts of answers. And they said, it's to help us to understand what people go through when they don't have any food. So some would say it's to teach us about self-discipline. Another one said that a German scientist had come up with some idea that fasting was really good. And then I bumped into a young girl who was a Muslim. She was a youth worker. And I just said to her off the cuff, I said, you're a Muslim. Why do you fast in Ramadan? And she said, because God tells me to. And that was like a reality check for me, because it made me realize that you don't need lots of other reasons why you do certain things if you're going to follow a creator. And I said, I really need to know more about this. I need to understand, what is this Sharia law thing that I hear about? How do I get hold of an English Quran? And how do I start to learn about Islam? Because there was no Google in those days, of course. You couldn't just go on the internet and find 1,000 different fatwas and ideas to sort your head out. So I gave him my phone number and I said, I'm a photographer in Manchester. I worked at Manchester Medical School at the time as a medical photographer in radiology. And we did lots of work on cancer. So days could be quite depressing. And I needed something to sort of focus on when I came home, rather than just going to the pub and doing the usual things that I did. And I didn't hear anything at all from this girl who I'd given the phone number to. And then about 3 weeks later, I got a phone call and she said, I've got an English Quran and I've got a couple of books and some pamphlets. How can I get them to you? And I said, it's difficult because I work in Manchester, I live in Blackburn. I basically leave to get a train at 6 in the morning because I have to be in work by 8. We do a lot of research at night that we can't do during the day because we do patients during the day. So I don't get home till 10 o'clock some nights. So it's difficult. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll leave a key under the mat and you can either put the books through the letterbox or whatever. She said the Quran won't fit through the letterbox. I said, okay, I'll leave a key under the mat. If you get a chance, pop up to my flat, put them in the flat and I'll go from there. Lo and behold, a few days later, I came home from work, and on my table in my little bedsit was a Yusuf Ali Quran, Islam in Focus, I think it was called in those days, and a couple of pamphlets about Islam. That was sort of the kickoff to the whole moving forward. I started reading, I started learning, and in not much time, decided that this was where I needed to be. So I wanted to take Shahada. So I contacted this girl again, and she put me in touch with her brother-in-law, and I took Shahada. Alhamdulillah, it changed my whole life. Absolutely changed my whole life. And subhanAllah, when it came time to think about marriage, I went back to the father of the girl who was the original inviter, I suppose. And he'd had a dream that his daughter married a white Muslim. So he said yes straight away. And we've now been married 40 years, alhamdulillah. And she's still teaching me things to this day, alhamdulillah. So that's my story in a nutshell. But from then on, because there was no easy way to get education, there was no easy way to learn apart from books. And I live in Blackburn, which is a very much an Indo-Pak community. And getting information in those days was extremely difficult. Imams didn't want to answer questions. They thought that asking questions was impertinent and disrespectful. Trying to learn to recite the Quran was almost impossible. And just access to knowledge was very, very difficult. So then I started on a journey to increase my knowledge and to move forward. And that's about it in a nutshell.
You know, today, obviously, we're talking about different groups. Are there any experiences that you would think are relevant to this topic that you've had?
I feel that all Muslims, all people who follow La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, are trying to get to Jannah. They will find different ways. They will find different methodologies. They will move from one to another as they journey through these different ways of getting to Jannah. And I used to envisage it as a big 4-lane highway, like you have in America. We now have them here with these smart motorways, but a big 4-lane highway. And some people are traveling towards, on their journey, on buses, in jamaats. And some people are in cars, in small groups. And some people are on bicycles. And some people are walking. And some people are running. And everybody's heading down this road. And that's how I rationalize this whole idea of different groups, different methodologies, different ideologies, all within the Sunni ideology, because I was a Sunni. I met a sheikh many, many years later and explained this analogy to him. And he said to me, Ilyas, the analogy is a good analogy, apart from one change I would make. Instead of it being a motorway, make it a river. Because if it's a motorway, you have to make a lot of effort to get to Jannah. Where if it's a river, Allah wants you to go to Jannah. So Allah is flowing you along this river, and you will change from one ideology or one group. Could be a group of friends. It could be a movement, Islamic movement. It could be just it could be, I was involved in Tabligh Jamaat when I first became Muslim. That wasn't my gateway to Islam, but it was in a way, my walking madrasa for the first couple of years of my life as a Muslim. And I think that we have to be mentally open to the fact that we will change. We're never going to be the same person from the day we took Shahada to the day we return to Allah, that we will change, our needs will change, our spirituality will change. I have never been a spiritual Muslim. I call myself an Islamic pragmatist, I suppose, because my main reason for becoming Muslim was because I wanted a life of order that didn't change according to the whims of society. It didn't change according to the whims of scholars or teachers. A life of order that was based on divine scripture, and that's what attracted me to Islam. So I'm more interested in the application of Sharia than I am interested in a spiritual journey.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair for sharing that journey with us today. I think a lot of it, for me personally, a lot of it really resonates with me, especially the bit about the image of the river, and different people. We're all just sink or swim trying to get to Allah the best that we can. And it's better to do that without being harsh and judgmental about people who are taking different boats than we are, perhaps, or swimming even. SubhanAllah. For a lot of new Muslims, it can get very confusing navigating these various labels and these groups that we hear applied to Muslims. We've got terms that are used by the media So externally applied labels, I guess you could call them, and non-Muslims, of course. And those perhaps are the most easy to disregard or dispel, although we will touch on them a little bit today. But then we have this gamut of words that are used by Muslims within the community, these self-applied labels, and often not in a very complimentary way, sadly. And it is a complicated topic. We don't have time to delve into every single term that is out there. But for today's purpose, I've listed the main ones that people who I support in my community often come to me with to start us off and to just sort of kickstart the discussion. And the first two in my list, Sunni and Shia. So if we start with these two, what is the difference? Why are they? We often hear that they're at odds with each other. Why is this? Are they really that different? And do all Muslims fall into one or the other? How can we understand these terms?
I think to understand the difference between the two, you have to go way, way back to the time of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. At the time, rulers around the known world had dynasties where their son or their brother or whatever, someone within their family would become the successor. And I think the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, deliberately broke that mold. When the Prophet ﷺ passed away, Abu Bakr Siddiq became the next Khilafah, and he was the next ruling person of the fledgling Muslim community. And we as Sunnis accept the four rightly guided Khilafah, Abu Bakr Siddiq, Umar, Uthman, Ali, as being the correct founders of Islam. And the fact that it isn't a dynasty, the fact that Islam, anybody can attain to rule, anybody can attain to scholarship, was founded in those early days of Islam by the way the Khilafah evolved and taught us how to run communities, particularly the community in Medina at the time.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt because you're saying a word that many of our listeners may not understand, Khalifa.
Khalifa is a ruler. Yes.
A ruler. Yeah. Okay. I think it gets translated into English as caliph, doesn't it?
Yes, as a caliph. Yeah.
Okay.
But basically, it's the ruler. There has, in any community, there needs to be a leader. And after the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, the next leader was Abu Bakr Siddiq, radiallahu anhu. May Allah be pleased with him. Now, the Shia disagree with that totally. The Shia broke away from mainstream Islam. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brother Bilal. But they broke away because they disagreed. And they said that Ali, the cousin of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, should have been the Prophet's successor. Not only because he was of the family of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, the family that we call Ahl Bayt, but also because he was the first male to embrace Islam. So he had this divine right, so to speak, to become the next leader. So it wasn't so much a religious split, more of a political split, I think. But that political split has become compounded over the many years because of the effects of the later rulers and what happened to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon his grandson, Karbala, and the understanding of what a leader is and what attributes a leader has. And to my understanding, I bought a book many years ago by the Observer newspaper, a little paperback, and it unpicked 12ers and 7ers and 6ers, the different types of Shia groups that follow different numbers of imams. The main Shia groups, I think, follow 12 imams, with Ali being the first. The 6ers and 7ers do the same. The Ismailis, I think, are one of the 7er groups. And this breakaway, commonly known as Rafidi, people who break away, this breakaway from Sunni Islam has caused trouble throughout the centuries for many of the Sunni leading families, for many of the rulers of Muslim nations, with lots of different groups that spring up with different extremist ideas under the Shia banner. So I think it's more of a political difference than it is a theological, spiritual difference. But it's a political difference that has had a wide impact and a very deep impact on the formation of Islam as we know it today and the formation of Muslim communities as we know it today. I'm sure some of your listeners watch the Turkish series, Ertugrul and Kurulus Osman. And
I'm sure.
We're all guilty of it. And in those groups, you see groups such as the Batinis, the Hashashin, Shia groups who were hell-bent on basically destroying the peace and tranquility that Sunni nations and Sunni rulers were trying to find for the communities that they led. So it's an issue. I know one tends to stay with the group that you embrace Islam with. So if you went to one particular mosque, and I'm going to use another term here, if you went to one particular mosque, which is a Brelvi mosque, for example, you would tend to stay with that mosque and with that group. If you embrace Islam in a Deobandi mosque, you would stay with that group. If you embrace Islam in an Ali Hadith mosque, you would stay with that group. And if you embrace Islam in a Shia mosque, if Shiism is your first spark of interest in Islam, you will tend to stay in a Shia group. Although I know many people who began as Shia and converted to Sunni once they understood that the practice of 12 as Shia is in contravention of what many of us would class as peaceful Islam. And their preference to do pilgrimage to Karbala rather than go to Mecca and Medina is a bone of contention amongst many people who started off as Shia and expected to be mainstream Islam.
In addition to what you've just said, one thing that has always struck me about the differences, well, you mentioned it at the beginning, the idea of a hereditary ruler, which Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not advocate for within Islam, and appointing Abu Bakr as-Siddiq as his successor was one clear indication of that. Another clear indication of that is that Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not have any male children live into adulthood to take over the role of prophethood. And I think, subhanAllah, when you think of that and you think, surely this is something that, when you think of the idea of Allah's decree and Allah decreeing that Islam not be a system of hereditary rule, if it was meant to be a hereditary rule, surely one of those children would have lived into adulthood. But that didn't happen. So surely, to my mind, that was always just the most logical thing. How can it be hereditary rule? Islam is not a matrilineal system. And yet we are sort of trying to shoehorn a matrilineal jump sideways in order to get to Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein, and as the next imams and so on. It just seems very counterintuitive to my mind. And I've always understood the difference between Shia and Sunni, as you said, brother, political. It happened after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Islam was completed up until that point, so it was a political schism. Over time, it has ended up being theological differences, but none of those theological differences existed at the time of the Prophet. And this is something that's very, very important to understand. There aren't two types of Islam. There's one type of Islam, and overlaid on that is a political schism. I don't know, Sheikh Bilal, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think
you're right. So I've divided these differences into three categories, really. So they're either difference of doctrine and belief, or difference of practice, or practical matters, or differences in methodology, the way that we think Islam can be attained in the best possible manner. The last two, they're not a massive problem for us, but the first one becomes an issue. With the Shias, like you said, it starts off as a political split. The word Shia is from Shi'atu Ali, which means a party of Ali. So there's a political split where certain groups, especially after the death of the Prophet's grandson who was martyred at Karbala, that Ali and his family and his descendants, they were the rightful successors to the leadership of the Muslim community. And then later on, it develops into more theological issues. So they start saying that these imams are actually infallible, and they start adding another part to the Shahada. So they don't, in the Shahada, say, wa Ali, Waliullah. They say Ali is, the saint of Allah to the Shahada. And then they start saying that certain parts of the Quran are missing. And these are, established beliefs. And, even accusing some of the other companions of being hypocrites or being morally corrupt as well. So over time, it develops into this polemical situation and the theological issues start to creep in. When we say Sunni, it's really with the dichotomy of Sunni Shia. So when we use the term Sunni, it's really to differentiate ourselves with the Shia. So Sunni means following the Sunnah, which means the way and the practice of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. So that's where the term Sunni comes from. You might also hear the term Ahlus Sunnah wa Jama'ah. So you might hear these terms, which just means that people follow the way of the Prophet, the Sunnah, and the Jama'ah, the congregation. So the congregation is the main body of the Muslims. That's what it means. Because there is a narration where the Messenger of Allah, speaks about different sects, and he's asked by the companions, what shall we do? And he says, stick to the Jama'ah, stick to the main body of the Muslims. So we find that the majority of Muslims consider themselves as Sunni Muslims. And the Shias are, I think, 10 to 15% of the Muslim world. Outside of these two, there are other groups that claim to be Muslims, but we as Sunni Muslims don't consider them to be Muslims. So we have the examples of the Nation of Islam in the United States, which was founded by Elijah Muhammad. So he claimed to be a prophet and a messenger of God. Obviously, we believe that to be false because the Quran is explicit that Muhammad is the final messenger of God. And we've had the Ahmadiyya movement, which originated in Pakistan as well. And you might see some of the mosques of some of their followers in different countries in the UK. They're here as well. You might come across them as well. But we as Sunni Muslims don't actually consider them as Muslims, even though they'll call themselves Muslims.
On the topic of the Ahmadiyya, one thing that as converts we should be aware of is that they are very adept at promulgating their religion to people and presenting it as though it is Islam. And even I think their website URL is the true Islam or the real Islam or something like that. So as converts, we need to be aware of this. These are religions that may have had roots in Islamic teaching, but their founders declared themselves as prophets, which of course we know Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the final prophet. So anybody claiming prophecy cannot, by definition, be telling the truth after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we need to understand as converts that these are groups that exist and they may claim something, but we know that they are not as they claim. They're just, and we treat them as another religion, really. With regards to the Sunni and the Shia split, though, I think one thing that is interesting that people have said to me, the Shia emphasize the Ahl Bayt, the people of the house, the family of Muhammad, peace be upon him. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding that as Sunnis, we do not have love for Ahl Bayt because that's a purely Shia thing. And this is, of course, untrue. We have great love and reverence for Ahl Bayt, for the family of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Similarly, the idea that the Shia don't follow the Sunnah at all, that they don't have compilations of hadith and following the example of the Prophet Muhammad, this is also not true, but there are differences. So I think that it's important to understand that, there are these political differences that have developed, but the core of the two comes from the same place because the differences happened after the death of the Prophet Muhammad.
I think it's worth mentioning also that when we speak about these groups, they're not monolithic in their nature. So you will find different types of Shias, you'll find different types of Salafis, you'll find different types of Hanafis as well. So, and we'll speak about all that shortly, I'm sure. With the Shias, there are three main groups, the Ja'faris, and the Zaydis and the Ismailis. So these are the three main groups of Shia, and they do vary quite differently, and there are huge differences between the three of them actually, and they might not all they don't all agree with one another. So the Zaydis, they're a lot closer to Sunni Islam than the other sects of Shiaism. So it's important to note that with every group there will be different spectrums as well, and we shouldn't treat them as monolithic and make blanket judgments. We shouldn't be judging people anyway, but shouldn't make blanket judgments on group X or group Y, Z.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair for mentioning that, especially since from now we're going to look at other terms. All of these, because everybody on this podcast is Sunni, which really I take that as sort of the default setting when you become Muslim. Unless you've made a conscious decision to be otherwise, you're Sunni. Would that be a fair assumption? I don't know, but I think all of us are Sunni, And so all of the terms we're going to talk about refer to terms used for the Sunni community. And this will show how much diversity there is within the Sunni community. So, of course, understand that the same diversity exists within the Shia community as well. But we're not going to be talking about that because that's sort of out of our sphere of experience, perhaps. So the next two words, which are often used seemingly as opposites and quite contentiously so, Sufi and Salafi. Now, how can we understand these two terms? I have my understanding. I'm not going to say what that is, but I would like to hear. First of all, let's have a legal definition, if there is one, Sheikh Bilal. Are there legal definitions of these words?
Legal definition, that might be tricky to do that. Sufism or Sufi there's different opinions about where the actual term comes from, but it was a term that was used historically to describe certain groups of Muslims who were more inclined to a spiritual path, which may be good thing, it may be bad thing actually, depending on how far you go. And we have different quotes from many of the early generations of scholars about Sufis. Some of them were in a negative sense, some of them were positive. So that's the general gist, really. So, and these two terms, actually, Sufi and Salafi, it's more about methodology rather than belief. It's more about methodology. So they're actually polar opposite methodologies, if you like. So Sufism is more about spirituality, more about connecting with your creator and following his spiritual path, which is appealing to a lot of converts, actually. And even a lot of non-Muslims find that they're reading books like Rumi and Ghazali and it's Farabi, and it's very appealing to them. But of course, Sufism has to be within the bounds of the Sharia. And then we could say the polar opposite methodology is Salafism. So Salafism is strictly about following the law and the way of the earliest generations of Muslims and not deviating from that. So sometimes they're called ultra-Orthodox or ultra-conservative Muslims, but it's all about sticking to those early generations and not following anything new in the religion. And again, within these two groups, we see a spectrum of Muslims, and they may have different beliefs. They may disagree with each other about certain things as well. They do, actually. Well, definitely. So they're not monolithic in nature. But if we think of the Salafis as being more puritanical, I would say. So I don't mean it in a derogatory way. It's a good thing. But they're more puritanical in their approach and methodology. And the Sufis are more liberal in their approach and methodology. And I don't mean that in any derogatory way. I'm just trying to make it clear to our listeners the different approaches.
I think one of my teachers use the description that the Salafi methodology is about the letter of the law and the Sufi methodology is about the spirit behind the law. And I thought that was interesting because for me personally as an individual, I've had phases of wanting to do both, of wanting to be more strict on myself, more literal, wanting to know what is it exactly that Allah wants me to do literally. And then other times when I think, surely this is open to interpretation. Surely it's more important to reflect and to turn inwards and so on. I find this all of this quite fascinating, to be honest. Brother Ilyas, how about yourself? Would you add to anything that was said?
When I first became Muslim, one of the things that stuck out in my mind more than anything, because I came from one denomination of Christianity, of which there are many. Some, one could say, are monotheistic and some are polytheistic in Christian denominations. And there is an overemphasis on Isa, as we know, as a prophet. There's an overemphasis on where Isa stands within Christian denominations. So when I became Muslim, the thing that stuck out in my mind was the phrase, obviously it's the translation in English, but the phrase, "For today I have perfected your religion," which comes from the last sermon of the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him. And I started thinking about that because I came from a puritanical Methodist background. So for me, to have something that is perfect, why would you add to it or why would you take away from it? And also, I had to understand anything, or should I say, stay away from anything that put the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, in relative terms, the same way that Jesus, Isa, was treated within Christian denominations. So my benchmark has always been the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, final prophet of Allah, great ruler, great statesman, great theologian, great teacher, but most of all, a human being. And the fact that the Islam, when the Prophet ﷺ from his own mouth said, "Today I perfected your religion," at that time in Medina, that moment, the deen, the religion as we know it, was perfect. So as far as being one way or another way, I don't know whether I have one way or another way. My understanding of Sufism, for example, is that it's about self-enlightenment. It's about searching for Allah's attributes in oneself and in this lifetime, rather than trusting in Allah and trusting in one's own practice to find Allah's attributes when we've passed from this life. So those two are quite different. I also have found historically many Sufi groups to overemphasize attributes of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to use, I loosely say, the term hadith, to justify divine status to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and not human status. If an individual becomes a Muslim and he has a particular need to have a spiritual leader, one spiritual guide, then fine. May Allah bless him on his journey, and may Allah give him a good guide. And that, to me, is what Sufism is about. Sufism is very prevalent in the early Seljuks were very Sufi, the Ottoman Empire. India, whether it's Deobandi, here's another term again, or whether it's Tabligh Jamaat, they have Sufi roots. They have roots where it's about discovering Allah's attributes. Rumi, a prime example of Rumi's poetry, is all about discovering Allah's attributes in the here and now. And I find that difficult. That's not my flavor of Islam. And I say flavor because I think that's a better term. I've fallen prey to some Sufi groups in the past where things have been made difficult for me because I've been felt to believe that I'm not a true Muslim, because I don't stand in awe of a hair of the beard of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, for example. I remember I went to Manchester to a group there, and the place was crowded, and it was only a small mosque, and everybody was saying, "Oh, the sheikh's coming, the sheikh's coming, the sheikh's coming," and it was almost Maghrib time, and we hadn't prayed Asr, and I was getting really on edge about this because they were saying, "Oh, we'll pray when the sheikh comes." I said, "You can't pray when the sheikh comes. You have to pray Maghrib on time. You can't delay Asr just for the sheikh to come and unveil the hair of the beard of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. That's not Islam, I'm sorry." And I was shouted down. So eventually I did the azan myself. I did the Iqamah and I led Salat. And I said, if anybody wants to follow, follow. But if you want to wait for the sheikh and you want to wait for the unveiling of the beard, of the hair of the beard of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that's entirely up to you. I had the same thing in Tunisia. Took my family for a family holiday to Tunisia, and we went on a coach trip, and they went to a particular city mosque, which was the same thing again, hair of the beard of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Me and my family sat on the back seat of the coach, and we stayed on the back seat of the coach. And the guide came and said, "You have to get off here." I said, "Why do you have to get off?" He said, "You have to go into the mosque where there's the hair of the beard of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him." I said, "No, I don't." I said, "I'm sorry, but this is an innovation. This is not from the Prophet. This is not from the Sunnah." And he said, "You convert Muslims," and he wagged his finger at me. But I said, "That's the way it is." That's the way it goes. Now, on the other foot, I attend now Al Hadith Mosque. I lived in Saudi Arabia for nearly almost 8 years. Most of my friends in Saudi Arabia we would class as Salafi. They followed Sheikh Fawzan. And I found their company as friends from all over the world, Canadians, Americans, Brits, Somalis, all good companions and good friends. I didn't particularly like their obsession with literalism. That concerns me. Where there is no, like you said, where there is no space for self-reasoning, where there is no space to actually try and understand Sharia yourself, everything is absolutely literal. And I've always had a problem with that. But many, many years ago, when I attended a Jimas meeting, way back, Jamaat bin Hajjal, his son of Jimas was a group in the 90s. So good brothers, good friends, but not my cup of tea because of the obsession on literalism and the fact that if you did not agree with them, you were not in their club. That was a problem. We used to have a Telegram group where we would arrange to go to a lecture or to meet up or whatever. And they would criticize other groups on this Telegram group. And that really annoyed me to a great extent. One of the groups that they used to go on and on about was they used to call people Hizbis, meaning people who were adherents to Ikhwan al-Muslimin or to Jamaat Islami Pakistan or whatever. Now, I used to get Eid cards off the head of Jamaat Islami Pakistan many years ago. And I have been to more Ikhwan meetings than I could shake a stick at. So by criticizing me directly, had they known that I was of that particular flavor, they would have ostracized me straight away, and they would have made sure that I didn't work in Saudi Arabia, because that was their modus operandi, so to speak. Within Salafianism itself, if there is such an ism, this idea of literal, there are many different groups and many different grades of literalism, if you get my drift. I used to go to a particular lecture by a really nice brother called Khalid Barry, whose father was a convert Muslim when I was a convert way back in the 80s. And I remember meeting Khalid's father once at a meeting at Martfield in the very early 90s. And I used to go to his ders on a Thursday night. And he never, ever talked about labels. He was educated at Medina University, graduated from Medina University. And he was one of the sweetest brothers you could know. And you wouldn't have labeled him as a Salafi. Unless you step outside of that, then you would label him. But I think one of the problems is that there is an obsession with labels. When it comes to Salafi and Sufi, there is an obsession. Even Sufi groups themselves speak in derogatory terms about other Sufi groups because they're just not following the same sheikh, or they're not following the same methodology, or they're geographically different, whether it's their adherence to Sheikh Nazim, or whether they're Chistis or Naqshbandis. And I think that that's an issue. But you get exactly the same with the Salafi ideology. You get people who think they're very harsh or think they're very strict adherents to the Quran and Sunnah, calling other Salafis weak because they don't have that same adherence. Or there may be Salafis who are, here's another term, Salafis who are Ash'ari in Aqidah, as opposed to being Athari in Aqidah. And I think Aqidah is a topic for another podcast, because I know very little about Aqidah.
Make note of that, Sheikh Bilal. We need to do a podcast on Aqidah.
Yeah,
I think that the Salafis tend to be very much Aqidah first, fiqh second, and that's what's in their mindset. And if you don't believe what they believe, you've got a problem. But that's just personal experience.
Yes, I would second a lot of what you've said. Although interestingly, like my own experiences, if I can touch on them, I came to Islam from a dabbling with Buddhism that lasted me about 5-6 years. And so my disposition at the time was very heavily spiritual. I had been sitting in temples, listening to people chant and, ringing bells and things like this. So I was very much into this deep reflection, meditation, that sort of thing. And one of the first Muslim sisters who I met when I moved to the UK then, after I actually embraced Islam, was somebody who was from a Sufi background. And we gelled very well because we had that spiritual compatibility in a way. And yet, within a year, and I'm going to preface this by saying it was the 90s, which for those of us who were around in the 90s know exactly what that means. The Salafi da'wah, the Salafi books and pamphlets and so on were in circulation. The Salafi movement was very strong at the university I was in London. And so I was attracted to that methodology because also I was looking for order and meaning in my life, and their literalism appealed. The idea that, there's differences of opinions at that time did my head in. How can there be a difference of opinion with Allah? I want to know what Allah wants me to do, and I want to know the right answer now. So, that really, really appealed to me in that sense. also what had bothered me, and I'm not saying this as a criticism, my mindset has changed so much since those days, but what really bothered me at the time about the sisters who were on the Sufi path that I knew was they're celebrating the Mawlid. And nowadays, I'm like, you do you. If you want to celebrate it, you celebrate it. You don't want to celebrate it, you don't celebrate it. It's not a big deal to me anymore. I've been to celebrations. I don't do it myself. But what bothered about it at the time was that I had just left Christmas behind. So why was I just going to replace that with another prophet's birthday? That rubbed me the wrong way, So this was where I was at very, very early on in my journey and sort of being pulled between the two. And I think, subhanAllah, all through my journey, these last 20 some odd years, 25 years, I guess, it's been a to and fro the whole time. And I think actually, interestingly, that's actually served me very well because it's given me insight into the way both types of people think. And I do think that it does vary on the person's personality type. Certain personality types will be attracted to literalism. Certain personality types will be attracted to spiritualism. And there's incredible beauty in both. And in fairness, I've met some so-called Sufis who were incredibly literal about fiqh. When it came to fiqh, if their sheikh said this, you did this and you did not question it. Whereas I've had incredible spiritual, deep conversations with some people who call themselves Salafis. So the two aren't mutually exclusive either. And I think that, when you said that labels are a problem, this is why labels are a problem, because you can't label somebody and they will just fit into that box completely. But it is important for us to understand where these labels come from, especially for new Muslims, so that we can understand that, actually, we don't need them. We don't need to label ourselves as one or the other.
Yeah, I think that there's a trend in our community where we have to label every single Muslim and put them into a little box and compartmentalize everybody who's a Muslim. But the truth is hazy. It's not here or there. It's always somewhere in the middle, isn't it? And like you said, people who have different personalities, they'll be attracted to different groups. And both of these methodologies, they both follow the Quran and they both follow the Hadith. They both believe in Allah and they pray the same way. But like you said, some may choose to be more literal, some may choose to be more non-literal or spiritual.
I had an interesting experience actually fairly recently where I was volunteering at an event, and it was an event for new Muslims. And I won't say the organization's name, but they do a lot of stuff for new Muslims. They do some good work, mashallah. And we were looking at the program of workshops that were being done. And I noticed in this program of workshops that there was nothing about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. There was nothing specifically talking about him. There was a workshop on knowing Allah. There was a workshop on learning how to pray. There was a workshop on nothing about the Prophet, peace be upon him. And I mentioned it to one of the other volunteers, and she said to me, this organization's a bit Salafi. They're not going to emphasize that. And I thought, that's an internal judgment right there. Like, you're part of this organization saying that. So I thought, but still, let's mention it. And I mentioned it to the brother in charge, and he just went, subhanAllah, that's a massive oversight. Yeah, we need to include that next year. Thank you. So, even these ideas, even internally, sometimes these groups will judge themselves as supposed to be one way. And then when you actually go to the people who are organizing the leadership of them, they'll be like, oh yeah, no, we do need to include that. We do need to focus more on that. So yeah, quite fascinating. Let's move the conversation along, because I think we could talk about these two divisions for a long time. Looking at day-to-day practice and Islamic law. And we have four main schools of Islamic law, or schools of fiqh, as it's called. What people will be familiar with is Hanafi. Hanafi is probably the most common one people will hear, but there's Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali, Maliki, which is the four main schools within Sunni Islam. What would be a simple way to understand what these are and why we have them? And what one should we follow, if or do we even need to follow one? I mean, I've heard some Salafi people say, no blind following of madhabs, no blind following of different schools of thought. What would you say to this?
I think it's important to understand that the four main schools of thought, Imam Malik, Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi, and Imam Ibn Hanbal, are sort of whittled down from many, many schools of thought. At the time of the Prophet, after the death of the Prophet, Muslim communities were growing, and leaders within Muslim communities from Medina to Mecca to Kufa to Baghdad, right across sort of the Arabian Peninsula, they had questions. They had very simple questions. How do I do wudu? What do I do? My child needs circumcising, or what about akika? Or I want to divorce my wife, or I want to divorce my husband. And they had these questions. So there were lots and lots of opinions and lots of scholars giving opinions. And out of that came what we class as the four madhabs. The difference between them, of course, is both geographic and chronologically. Imam Malik the first, Imam Malik only took his evidences and his teachings in a way from Quran and Sunnah, but only within the geographical area of Medina. Abu Hanifa, I think he was in Kufa. Imam Shafi started off studying with Imam Malik and studied with Abu Hanifa. And Imam Ibn Hanbal studied with Imam Shafi. And I think that the important thing about those four, why they're important, is that they stayed independent of the governance under which they lived. They ended up in prison. They ended up being tortured in prison because they would not follow the ruling khilafah or the ruling vizier or whatever. And they really laid the foundations of what we now know as fiqh, as Sharia, and the interpretation of the Quran and the Sunnah in the way we live our daily lives as Muslims. Now, historically, you would inherit the madhab of your father. So if your father was a Hanafi, you would become Hanafi. But as converts, we don't have that privilege, I suppose. But we may inherit the madhab of our father-in-law. We may pick one from four, or we may pick none. When I first became Muslim, I said it earlier, I was in the Tabligh movement in a Deobandi mosque, and everybody there was Hanafi. And so I sort of fell into following the way of the Hanafi. And then I was asked by my Tabligh Amir to go and break up a group of young Muslims who were on the wrong path. I was supposed to go in as a Tabligh Jamaat, join them, infiltrate them, and then bring them over to our way of thinking, so to speak. So I went to this particular mosque, and this particular mosque was a Cockney mosque. Not Cockney as in up with apples and pears, but Cockney as in part of India called Kokkan, who are predominantly Shafi madhab. So I went to this mosque, and I watched the way these guys were praying, and the power, the solidity of the Jamaat saying Ameen aloud, and just it really felt like I was praying in Jamaat with people, not just as an individual stood in a line with others. And their way of thinking was more my way of thinking, in that it wasn't, say, corrupted with beliefs and practices that I didn't agree with. Because in those days, like I said, there was no Sheikh Google. So if I had a question, I used to get on a train and travel and find a sheikh to answer my questions. And I used to travel down to Goodge Street or travel down to Central Mosque in London, which is no mean feat from Blackburn, just to ask one question. Because I had this understanding that knowledge is from the feet of scholars, not from books. In books, you get information, but understanding, you need to sit at the feet of scholars. So that's what I did. I traveled. And I would recommend that to anybody embracing Islam today. Don't rely on books and websites and shit Google. Actually speak to scholars. Choose your scholars wisely. But I like the way these guys practice. A week prior to me joining them, they had invited Ahmed Deedat to Blackburn. And even though I never really agreed with Ahmed Deedat's style of dawah, he was a big figure. So I ended up leaving Tabligh Jamaat and joining this group. And this group called themselves Al-Risala because they were Shafi Muslims. And we used to do all sorts of dawah work. We invited Hamza Yusuf, Siraj Wahaj, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Quick, lots of great scholars to Blackburn. We also put adverts on buses to read the Quran. We used to travel down to Goodge Street with a big van and fill it up with Qurans and bring it back because if you went into a standard Indian mosque in Blackburn, you would never get an English translation of the Quran. It was like Latin Mass was to the Roman Catholics. Everything had to be in Urdu. So we sort of tried to break that mold. And we were very, very active in that sort of way. But what I found was that what I was learning following the Hanafi school of thought, I started to relearn following the Shafi school of thought. And when we spoke about fiqh in groups, we talked about a series of books called Fiqh Sunnah, by Imam Sadiq, it's called. Yes, yeah. And I had an issue with following this book because it gave you all opinions of all the four madhabs.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so let's continue this discussion in part 2, coming soon, inshallah.